The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
If you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America.
On Politics Now, President Donald Trump makes the pitch to keep his job. Hear from his supporters at the Republican National Convention, including the USC's Dana White.
My hope for America is that law enforcement and people in the communities across our country can come together and realize that as Americans, we have more in common than we have differences.
Full pardon. President Donald Trump pardons Las Vegas and convicted bank robber John Ponder. What Ponder had to say about his prison reentry program on the national stage this week.
I'm just very frustrated at the fact that I have to live off of this $200 a week right now.
And whether Nevada is applying to a federal program that extends an unemployment payment bonus.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Politics Now. I'm John Langler. President Donald Trump is officially renominated by Republicans to keep his job. This week's Republican National Convention included several Southern Nevadans. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Alexandra Limon reports.
On the final night of the Republican National Convention, House Minority Leader California Congressman Kevin McCarthy made the case for President Trump's re-election.
We confronted China head-on, tore up bad trade deals and made better ones, supported our men and women in uniform.
Republicans tackled the pandemic head-on, which has killed more than 180,000 Americans, saying President Trump is the right person to continue to lead the fight against COVID-19.
We will defeat it because America is where innovation happens, and we are developing a vaccine in record time.
I'm a proud American and proud descendant of warrior ancestors.
Utah's Attorney General Sean Reyes said despite what Democrats say, America's light still shines bright for immigrants.
I interact with some of the most marginalized victims on earth, and they love America. They love President Trump because he's fighting for their freedom.
And with the White House lawn packed by his supporters, President Trump officially accepted the Republican nomination for president.
At no time before have voters faced a clearer choice between two parties, two visions, two philosophies, or two agendas.
It's the first time in modern history a president has used the White House for a strictly political event. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris gave a strong response to the president's speech.
The Republican convention is designed for one purpose: to soothe Donald Trump's ego.
Senator Harris also addressed the shooting of Jacob Blake by a police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That shooting set off a new round of protests around the country this week. Pro sports leagues postponed their games when athletes went on strike. Harris says she and former Vice President Joe Biden spoke with the Blake family this week, and she wants justice for Black Americans.
We will only achieve that when we finally come together to pass meaningful police reform and broader criminal justice reform and acknowledge, yes, acknowledge and address systemic racism.
The first presidential debate is now scheduled for Sunday, September 29th, and Biden has said that he will take part. The Vegas Golden Knights and Las Vegas Aces both canceled games along with other sports leagues. There were protests around the country, again because of the shooting in Kenosha. Governor Steve Sisolak released this statement saying, in part, I stand in solidarity with the Aces and athletes all across the country and those fighting to bring about social justice. We have the full statement at 8newsnow.com. The RNC also featured a local man named John Ponder. He served prison time for bank robbery, then started a nonprofit to help prisoners transition into civilian life. Now he has a full presidential pardon. Ponder is the CEO of Hope for Prisoners, which we have profiled here on 8 News Now. Metro Police credit that program for its work, keeping those who have served time from ending up back behind bars. Ponder founded the nonprofit in 2009 after serving his own time. He thanked the president for issuing the pardon and credited his own faith.
Today, praise God, I am filled with hope, a proud American citizen who has been given a second chance. My transformation began in a prison cell where I found myself a 3-time convicted felon facing yet another sentence. I gave my life to Jesus and made him a promise that I would spend the rest of my days helping others like me. Thank you.
Nevada gave Ponder a pardon back in March. He was joined at that speech by the FBI agent who arrested him, a man named Richard Beasley. The two of them have since become good friends. The opening prayer on Tuesday at the RNC was from Las Vegas pastor Norma Urbazo. She offered a prayer for Jacob Blake, again, the black man who was shot and paralyzed by a police officer there in Wisconsin. Urbazo and her husband are pastors at the International Church of Las Vegas, and both are, as you would imagine, supporters of President Donald Trump. UFC president and Las Vegas resident Dana White spoke on the final night of the RNC.
It blows my mind how quickly some of the leadership in this country has forgotten the critical role first responders play in our society. Police departments and other law enforcement, even some fire departments, have faced opposition from many in this country. But they are always the people who are asked to step up when things are at their worst and put themselves at risk. That has certainly been the case during this ongoing pandemic. Come on, America. Defunding these vital positions is not the answer.
White went on to call the U.S. economy before the coronavirus the greatest in our nation's history. He also said President Trump has done everything he can do to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. So did Republicans get their point across at the Republican National Convention? Well, I spoke with Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel on Friday.
Help me understand the difference between the perception and the reality of what is said in a speech, what is said by the president, and the reality on the ground. What are you guys seeing on the ground? What are you seeing in the U.S. that maybe the Biden campaign, the Democrats, are missing about life right now?
Well, I think the president does lay out a very contrasting vision between what where Joe Biden wants to take this country and where President Trump wants to take this country. And let's just break it down from a policy perspective. I mean, I think he did a good recap of Joe Biden's history. Joe Biden let China into the World Trade Organization. Once that happened, and he also voted for NAFTA, we saw 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs leave this country. You saw Joe Biden on the world stage be against the raid against Osama bin Laden. He voted for the Iraq War. And beyond that, Joe Biden has said, if I get elected, I'm going to raise taxes on 82% of Americans. I'm going to shut down our energy independence, which means we're all going to be paying more for gas and for heating our homes. I know that's not an issue where you are. I'm from Michigan. That's an issue for us. And then the president contrasted that with, I'm going to continue with deregulation, cutting taxes, better trade deals, things that have spurred economic growth under my administration. This pandemic came, obviously it changed the whole world, and I'm the right person that's going to build it back. So it's important to lay out those contrasts, and I think the president also ended on a very hopeful note that the best is yet to come for our country.
There was something that you said recently, I believe it was, regarding poll workers. I think this is a nationwide discussion that you were having, but specific here to Nevada, we've heard the president, there's litigation on right now. It's happening here with the mail-in balloting. The Republican Secretary of State brought this about, and the lawmakers to try and help with safety for the coronavirus. Obviously, there are some concern from the Republicans' point of view and from the RNC. How long is this fight going to last? And are you explain, I guess, again, the concerns moving forward?
I think what's happened in Nevada is incredibly troubling, that your legislature and your governor came in the dead of night and completely rewrote your election laws 90 days out from an election. So 2 things. 1, absentee ballots are fine. There's a verification process of me saying, hi, I'm Ronna McDaniel. I would like an absentee ballot. And there's that helps you know that I am the voter. What you're doing in your state is you just passed sending live ballots to every voter, whether they ask for it or not, trying to strip away any type of voter verification. You can do 2 ballots in an envelope. If it's not postmarked, it can be counted after Election Day. I mean, there's the things that your legislature and your governor did to upend your election process before a pivotal election is really unacceptable. And we should all have confidence in our election process.
Again, the Secretary of State's office maintains that the process is secure for the mail-in voting. Now, as McDaniel mentioned, the RNC has sued Nevada over the mail-in ballots, Nevada sending ballots to every active registered voter for the general election. That litigation is still working through the court system, and we will have more on this a little bit later on in the program. Coming up next here on Politics Now, an unemployment conundrum. Nevada applies for a new federal unemployment benefit program, but not all of it.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Nevada has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. This week, Governor Steve Sisolak and the state begrudgingly applied for a new federal assistance program. It would give the unemployed an extra $300 a week. However, the state is not matching that federal money. Governor Sisolak released a statement saying, quite simply, Nevada cannot afford it. The governor's statement says, in part, I want to do everything I can to ensure Nevadans get much needed help with unemployment benefits during this historically difficult time, which is why I authorized Dieter to apply for the Lost Wages Assistance Program. That's that federal program. The only option for additional federal assistance is currently available. However, just because it's the only option does not mean it's the best option. Our Joe Moeller spoke with Dieter's new acting director and leader of the Rapid Response Strike Force. She says more workers are being trained to help Nevada's unemployed get their benefits.
Mostly what I've been trying to focus on is the backlog.
Barbara Buckley, who was leading Dieter's Rapid Response Strike Force, and Elisa Caparata, the acting director, addressed work being done at the department. We first found out what is being done to tackle the backlog.
The Division of Welfare and Supportive Services are putting 200 of their welfare workers through a training right now to be able to work on these claims.
Buckley says those workers are being trained right now and should be working very soon. New technology is being implemented as well.
And we're piloting a partnership with ID.me, which would take folks who we just need to verify their identity. We're trying to see if we can take that step of the process out of our system and give it to ID.me.
They say to keep an eye out for an ID.me email if identity verification is needed for your claim. We know many have filed an appeal and are wondering when something will happen with appeals.
PUA appeals, right? PUA is a new program. So the computer system is being finalized to kind of arrange the hearings.
Buckley says those hearings should begin mid-September. As for the Lost Wages Assistance Program or the $300 weekly payments, they say it could be weeks if that money even gets approved. Reporting in Las Vegas, Joe Moeller, 8 News Now.
You can watch the entire interview there on 8newsnow.com, including the discussion on fraud and claims that have been denied by Dieter. Next Tuesday, Nevada's moratorium on home evictions goes away. A new one from the Gwynn Center, estimates more than 250,000 tenants in Nevada are at risk of eviction. More than 25,000 people in Clark County have applied to the CARES Housing Assistance Program for some help here with paying their rents, but those applications have been paused. The state treasurer's office says once staff get through the backlog of applications, they'll evaluate whether to take on more. One woman told us that she applied for that program back in mid-July. She was in the process of getting help, then says she never heard back.
Just give me an answer. That's all I want. You know, let me know where I stand, so if I have to go to other avenues, I could do that. You know what I mean? Instead of sitting around thinking, okay, well, maybe they'll help me, maybe they won't help me. You know, it's just, again, it's up in the air, and it's kind of mind-baffling that you know, I don't have a solution.
Clark County recommends homeowners or renters who do need help use the Nevada 211 website. The Nevada Treasurer's Office is trying to meet demand, says in order to meet that demand, the federal government has to approve a new relief bill. Coming up next here on Politics Now, ways to improve policing.
And sometimes with our presence, our mere presence causes escalation versus de-escalation.
What is Nevada doing to address police reform? We speak with Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo about the talks that he has had and has not had with lawmakers.
You're watching Politics Now.
Governor Steve Sisolak has denied a request from Nevada's Secretary of State Barbara Sagavsky for an emergency regulation on so-called ballot harvesting. Governor Sisolak says her request echoed voter suppression rhetoric. Now, this stems from a bill passed during the special session to expand mail-in balloting here in Nevada. It allows organizers or activists to collect ballots and then drop them off for people. It's called ballot harvesting, and it used to be a felony under state law. Sagavsky wanted those people collecting ballots to register with the state first, and they would also say whose ballots they collected and dropped off. Sisolak's letter added that he does have the highest regard for Sagavsky, and he still has full confidence in her ability to run a fair and transparent election in November. At a barbecue to support law enforcement this week, Nevada Republican Assemblyman Tom Roberts addressed police reform bills that were passed during the special session of the legislature.
There's a lot of anti-police sentiment around the country, but they continue to come to work and do what we ask them to do. I mean, even this last legislative session, you know, there were some things that were passed that kind of undermined some of the police officer Bill of Rights and things like that. But despite that, they show up to work and they do the job that we expect them to do, and they deserve thanks for it. Budget. Now,
Assemblyman Roberts was an assistant sheriff with Metro Police, but he is now retired from the force. He also criticized the way those bills were passed up in Carson City, with a lot of the discussions and votes happening late at night or early in the morning. Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo has weighed in several times on the Defund the Police movement. He says he does support certain elements of it. And this week on our Morning Cup of Joe segment, he talked about the changes he would like to see on mental health issues and whether or not he's been talking to any legislators. Talk about the issues of mental health and the crisis in our community, the response by Metro officers when they're dealing with someone who is suffering from mental illness. There have been some shootings involving that recently. You've talked before about efforts to try and find alternatives to dealing with those people on the street. What alternatives are in place, and maybe what's being considered moving forward?
Yeah, I think the hurdle, I'm glad you bring this subject up, because part of the defunding discussions that are going on around the nation, reference police departments, include maybe a better way to respond to these types of calls where people are directly involved in some kind of mental crisis. Either they're the victim or the suspects. And when the police show up, which are the first responders, when people are lost to what to do, they dial 911. So obviously we become the first responder. And sometimes with our presence, our mere presence causes escalation versus de-escalation. And a lot of times that's because of lack of resources. So you don't know what to do, you call 911, we respond because we have to respond, we need to respond. But maybe there's a better way to do that. So my officers receive a modicum of training in mental crisis. It's called crisis intervention training and or team. It's 40 hours in the academy. It's continual recertification on an annual basis. But the intent is to expand their resume and learn how to deal with people in crisis. In other words, de-escalate, talk them down, and eventually when we're able to calm the situation, make it static, provide resources in lieu of incarceration. And that's the problem with police work involved in this type of business per se, or profession, is our answer is arrest, usually because of lack of resources or community resources. So if you change that paradigm and you have individuals that are professional in that type of issue, they have better access to resources, better understanding of the individual in crisis, and maybe give the police more tools to be successful versus unsuccessful in these types of situations.
Well, have there been discussions so far with commissioners or with, I know the special session just finished, but moving forward with lawmakers about trying to put something on the books that will help with that?
To be frank with you, no, John. I think a lot of people's heads were still spinning on after the special session. I anticipate we're going to be engaged in some of those conversations, because it usually involves dollars and my budget per se. But the city of Las Vegas has made that leap via their fire service. So they got that program in place because, you know, when you call dispatch, it's either police or medical or fire. We transfer those calls over to medical if it's a mental crisis, and then they have fire and or social services respond. So what we want to do is build on that program and then move it over into the county.
We can catch the full interview with 8 News Now on 8newsnow.com.